Раз.
Okay, there you go.
Russell. Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Раз.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just waiting for the audio. You can hear me? Hello. My name is Kylie Johnson, and welcome to the Energy Climate Security Nexus Global Paradigms through the Lens of Ukraine. In my normal life, I'm a former journalist who got very bored in the public service and discovered digital communication. Never let a journalist loose in any government department. I am now a Churchill Fellow specialising in decarbonising the heavy vehicle sector in Australia. I say Australia because I have a koala here, which you're all welcome to. If anyone here runs for too long, the koala will attack them. I will circle the koala people. If you go too long, the koala will circle. Special weapon known only to Australians. Don't tell the Russians. Now, in my other life, I work in disasters and emergencies, mainly in community engagement and communication. I worked in cyclones, floods, and hugely destructive storms. Obviously, climate change, and Australia is very much on the front line of that. In January 2020, I was called in to work on the massive Australian bushfires, which you may well have seen on your television screens at home, decimated 240,000 square kilometres or 24.3 million hectares of bushland. I was in the first crew that was sent in after the bushfires, and I drove through the Blue Mountains, and it was incredibly eerie. It was, I don't say this lightly, it was like a meteor had smashed into the earth and destroyed everything around it. All you could see were fallen, blackened trees and hundreds of kilometres of black. And I supported a community that was so badly traumatised, they refused to leave their devastated township. They'd lost people, they'd lost homes, everything was burnt to the ground. I worked with them as they try to come to terms with this unbelievable loss. And I understood what they were going through because this was personal for me. My brother and his family live in the Blue Mountains. And in 2013, a bushfire swept through their town, the town where I grew up. And it started with an old power line that hadn't been looked after properly, had fallen onto trees. This fire destroyed everything in its wake. My brother was in the worst hit street. And when we were finally allowed into that street, it was gone. All the houses we knew, all the people we knew, many were dead, houses were gone. Smouldering ruins of dozens of homes, stunned people looking at piles of rubble where their lives used to be. My brother's house survived, but nearly everyone else in every other house was gone. I won't forget the black trees, I won't forget that smell, and I won't forget the sound of silence, because when bushfires happen, the birds are killed and everything is silent. The whole community seemed to be destroyed, or was it? And slowly the regeneration began. The power lines were rebuilt, electricity was switched back on, green leaves started to shoot from the blackened trees, and the birds returned. The noise came back. And the noise of construction started, and they started to build new homes. And the street, I then realized that street was actually better than it was before. The houses were better, the infrastructure was better, and the people were stronger, and they felt a pride in that reconstruction. And I think, look, it's not the same. It's never, ever going to be the same. It's different, but it's stronger. And I was fascinated by how communities can actually regenerate and rebuild after disasters and crises of any kind, including war, and how they can take that opportunity to create a new reality. So I thank you today for allowing me to MC this very special event. And it brings me to today's panel discussion as we look at the Ukraine and the opportunities to regenerate, rebuild, and emerge stronger than ever before. The war in Ukraine has been marked by repeated Russian attacks on energy infrastructure, and this has brought into sharp relief the complex relationship between environmental resources, energy systems, climate change, and security dynamics. The war in the Ukraine is felt worldwide, believe me, including across the energy sector. Ukraine's experiences provide a compelling case study for understanding how these dynamics interact and cascade in regions affected by conflict and energy dependency. To discuss the challenges and opportunities in the Ukraine is our panel of remarkable experts. Now, I must apologise here. As a former radio newsreader, I have tried very hard to get these pronunciations right, but I'm going to get them horribly wrong, but I will try my very best. Sylvie Goyer is the Deputy Coordinator and the Head of Environmental Activities at the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. She's worked on environmental protection, climate change, and sustainable development for over 20 years. Surely not. Michael Melling, I'm hoping that's right, is the Deputy Director at the Centre for Energy and Environmental Policy at MIT and a professor at the University of Strathclyde Law School in Glasgow. His work focuses on climate policy design and implementation at the domestic and international level, including its intersections with environmental, energy, financial market, and trade policy. Maria Rolim is a partner at Rolim Law Firm in Sao Paulo. She is a lawyer and economist who specializes in energy law regulation with a focus on renewable energy, energy transition, and climate change. Mikhail Kalis is the Deputy Scientific Director at the Institute for Climate Protection, Energy and Mobility, EV, and heads the Institute's Research Academy Department. He's also a senior researcher in the energy cluster at the Interdisciplinary Research Centre for the Baltic Sea region. Douglas Horn is CEO and founder of Good Block Holdings, a venture studio innovating critical solutions with a focus on carbon-free cloud computing services. Nazar Kolod is a scientist at the Joint Global Change Research Institute, specializing in emissions, energy, and policy. I'm so sorry if I butchered your name. I did not mean to. Simon Schaefer Stradowski is an executive board member of the Institute for Climate Protection, Energy and Mobility, EV. He is a legal expert specializing in energy and climate law. And last, but by absolutely no means least, is the force of nature that is Evgenia Kopet. I can't do it. I'm so sorry. Kopitsia. That will do. Ah, thank you very much. Who is a legal scholar specializing in environmental, climate, and energy law from international EU and Ukrainian perspectives. Now, you'll notice our Ukrainians are seated, but they will come to the front eventually. Let's begin with examining global energy dependencies and security risks. So, Mikhail Melling, could you please start by addressing how the Ukraine conflict reshaped global energy security paradigms?
Right. Thank you very much. And a very nice opening, anecdote or story or experience. So I think the impact can hardly be overstated. If you looked at the European Union in 2021, for instance, it imported almost half of gas, half of oil, and 25% of oil and half of coal from Russia, from one country. And of course, the conflict changed that dramatically. So countries like Germany that were extremely dependent on natural gas imports, pipeline gas from Russia, quickly had to reorient and completely, reinvent their energy supplies of this fuel. And they did it through various ways. So bans on coal imports from Russia, a sort of punitive tariffs on oil, and trying to diversify the gas supplies. LNG had to increase dramatically to get gas shipments, for instance, from the United States, and pipeline gas from neighboring countries, Norway, for instance, or from within the EU, like the Netherlands. This comes at a cost and it takes time. And the impact on the European energy market, and of course, there's impacts on the global market, but on the European energy market was first that the prices of fuels like gas just increased by several 100%, which then in turn, because it became the marginal source of energy in the electricity market, also had that effect on electricity prices. This was a crisis in Europe, not just for households, for consumers that suddenly faced dramatically higher electricity bills, but also for industry. So for instance, the chemical sector in Germany, having one of the main feedstocks increase in price several 100% meant that production had to be curtailed. Several chemical industry plants were just shuttered altogether. So this is much more than just an energy problem. This is a fundamental economic problem that really shook the continent. And as I said, there's spillovers because now you suddenly have the US, which is the largest oil and gas producer in the world, ramp up its LNG. It's some of its flows and so on. So this spills over. It affects the global energy market. And of course, this is a security concern for the reasons I just described, but we're going to talk about renewables in a second. So
the joy of feedback. Can you hear me? Great. So what vulnerabilities in the energy systems has the crisis exposed?
So these supply chain dependencies is with fossil fuels, the moment a source of supply, a supply flow is interrupted, activity comes to a stop, you know. It's very different from renewable energy, where the installed capacities, say, of solar and wind continue producing because there is no fuel you're using, you're harnessing. Essentially, it's all solar energy and mediated also into turbulence, wind, etc. But, you know, it's free and it's something that's locally available. With fossil fuels, you don't have that. And so that is the main vulnerability. It's interesting, just as an anecdote, that, for instance, the US military and military forces around the world have identified the supply chains of gasoline, diesel, etc., to the front as one of the largest causes of death and injury of military. So casualties defending long supply chains to where the fossil fuels are stored and processed, etc., to the front. And so there's an interest even in the military to try and move away from fossil fuels as the main source of energy for vehicles and so on.
And so how can renewable energy reduce geopolitical risks?
So as I just explained, renewable energy, because once the stock is installed, you don't need continuous fuel supplies in order to continue producing it. That is where its resilience comes from. Now, there are two caveats. Of course, if you are using renewables in a centralized electricity grid, which is our default in countries around the world, at least the vast majority, you still have the vulnerabilities of the infrastructure. And we've unfortunately seen that, of course, manifest in Ukraine, for instance. Attacks on transmission and distribution grids can impact the supply of electricity. But at least the generation, especially in the more distributed it becomes, the more resilient it will be. There's a second caveat that also in the supply of the components and the critical raw materials necessary, so rare earth metals, magnets, etc., necessary to build solar PV modules, wind turbines, electric vehicles, and all that. So all that's necessary to switch to an electrified, renewably powered economy, there are supply chain dependencies there too. China dominates these markets 60, 70, 80%, depending on which kind of component or material. But again, even if there were a conflict and China were to stop with export restrictions, supplying these materials, whatever capacity we have installed, which is many, many gigawatts of solar, many, many gigawatts of wind, will continue producing. That's a major difference. So some of those concerns are a bit overblown. It is fundamentally different when you're in a renewable world compared to a fossil fuel powered world.
Thank you so much. Michael Callas, how do energy dependencies affect regional security in the Baltic area?
Thank you very much for the question and also for the nice introduction. I would like to before answering your question on the regional security with regard to energy dependency, I would like to highlight that interesting concept that we just kind of figured out from your introduction to what Michael Mehling already mentioned. We started with climate change and the impacts on Australia. Then we went to energy security and energy dependency and conflict regions. So we already made like the major steps towards something that we might call the approach or nexus of energy, climate, and security that we might talk about later again. But with regard to your question, what energy dependencies effects had on the regional security in the Baltic Sea region, there's a lot to unpack. Frankly, I'm not telling you any news when I tell you that the region and specific countries like Germany, but also Finland and the Baltic region have been highly dependent on Russian imports, including electricity, obviously natural gas, but also uranium for Finland and also technology for nuclear plants in Finland as well. But regarding your question, you actually have to kind of adapt it, I would say, because talking about energy dependencies in the region, you have to talk about past dependencies, obviously, and the effects those past dependencies have on the regional security now. We also have to talk about current dependencies that we are kind of developing in the region with regard to infrastructures, as mentioned by Michael Mehling already, looking at, for example, the Baltic Interconnector, but also the obviously Nord Stream pipeline. That this has been a dependency, and now it shows that those kinds of infrastructures, big transnational infrastructures, are critical infrastructures that might have an effect on the regional security as well. But also we have to look at future dependencies with regard to LNG, obviously, how this develops. Will there always be an US market for LNG importing in the Baltic Sea region? But also with regard to upcoming or emerging technologies like hydrogen, will there be new dependencies with new geopolitical risk, potentially new geopolitical risk? But when talking about energy dependencies and then looking at the question of regional security, I would like to add that we interestingly talk about regional security, but actually we could first talk about energy security, because the point that I just want to raise here is, maybe you have already seen it, but over there you can see kind of thing that I really like. What's interesting is that you see a solar panel over there, and the title is energy security, but this solar panel was hit by a Russian missile, as far as I understood the headline. So actually, some years ago, when you were talking about energy security, and Michael Mehling did actually the same, we were talking about security of supply. So is the energy affordable? Do I have sufficient supply throughout the year or throughout some decades or anything, any other time scale? But now when we talk about energy security, we actually talk about something else additionally. We talk about resilience towards cyber attacks, hybrid warfare, or even traditional security sector issues, as you can see with those kinds of solar panels over there. So yes, energy dependencies and also conflicts did have a huge effect on security, on energy security in the context, but also on regional security. With regard to the Baltic Sea region, and I'm afraid of the koala bear, so I'm not talking too much here. With regard to the Okay, so with regard to regional security, we have to see that in fact there are two things that are shifting in the Baltic Sea region. First, we have a momentum for securitization. This can be good and bad. Good that we have an let's say a momentum for upcoming energies like hydrogen, which might be regarded as renewable energy, but also with regard to the securitization phenomenon, we see hydrogen in a matter or a narrative that one might call scale first and green later, which means nothing else that we are also talking about blue hydrogen, like hydrogen based on fossil fuels, basically. But also on hydrogen based on nuclear energy and those kinds of things. So a securitization momentum that might lead to a new shift of energy mix in the Baltic Sea region. And the other momentum that we see is actually something that is wonderful in the Baltic Sea region. It's transnational cooperation. In fact, the World Energy Council highlighted in its Energy Trilemma Report 2024 that the region only managed to come through the energy crisis already mentioned by Michael Mehling through transnational cooperation. So it was not Germany managing the energy crisis, or Sweden or Lithuania or any other country. It was the region together managing the energy crisis based on, let's say, for example, LNG in Klaipėda, so Lithuania, and then those kinds of LNG gas could be provided for Finland as well to the Baltic interconnector. So you see that the regional security concept leads to a regionalization in the Baltic Sea region as well, with regard to infrastructure, with regard to energy supply, and maybe also energy mix, but that's something that we might see.
I told the koala bear to calm down. It's fine. Thank you very much. We're now moving to infrastructure and conflict impact. So Sylvie Goyer, what are the immediate and long-term impacts of infrastructure destruction?
Thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me. I'm honored to be here with such distinguished panel. My name is Sylvie Goyer, indeed. I work for the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Now, as you may know, energy is a pillar of security. Without energy, there is no development, there is no assistance, there is no emergency, there is no basic services. That's why we consider, and that's why we work on energy security. It is a pillar of a stable country. Now, our mandate is to support our member states, indeed Ukraine, in ensuring its stability and peace and security. Now, I have three messages on your question. Now, in the context of climate change, energy is both part of the problem, and it was part of the problem in Ukraine. If you look at the first NDC, it's also part of the solution. That's the good news. But also we must consider that it's also a sector that's being impacted by climate change. So any of the solution has to be resilient to climate change. And that's my first message. So in reconstruction, in rebuilding, and we applaud indeed the will of Ukraine government, the will of Ukraine institutions and the partners to push for a green and resilient transition. That means we have to take into account climate impacts onto these infrastructures. Of course, you're taking into account man-made disasters, but natural disasters as well, as they will be coming, and they will be coming in a few years. We know that. Now, the OSCE has been supporting Ukraine through a number of projects. In particular, I'd like to cite one, which is mitigating climate change threats to critical energy infrastructure. We've been fortunate to work with the Ukrainian government and a working group to identify and assess the risk of critical energy infrastructure, the risk of climate change. And with that process and consultation, we've identified 18 critical energy systems. So here we're talking infrastructure, we're talking transmission, we're talking generation of energy and distribution. Now, through that process, we're now moving to assessing climate risk and vulnerabilities. And the second stage is developing downscaled model. We have, you know, about the IPCC climate modeling and the global modeling. We need to downscale all of the modeling to where it matters, whether it's a particular landscape in Australia or whether it's a critical energy infrastructure. We need to make available those climate modeling at that level so that decision makers are able to take it into consideration. My second message is we talk about resilience of the energy system in Ukraine, and my fellow panelists already mentioned this. Now, in order to be resilient, it has to be accepted. And I would like to underline the focus that has to be put on the communities so that any new system, and indeed we do promote renewable energy as much as possible, it has to be accepted by the communities. We know how difficult change is. Even so, in a difficult context like Ukraine, bringing in the communities, bringing in the stakeholders is going to be critical to get acceptation. I come from a country, France, where there was a big push against renewables, a big push against some of these changes, because we did not involve the citizens and the community. So that's my next message. Finally, and you underlined Michael, I forgot, Michael, one of those. Cooperation. Indeed, that's the C in our logo. So we work on security, we work on cooperation. We see it indispensable that this cooperation continues with neighboring countries, with friendly countries, with all of countries and stakeholders, including the businesses. So we are doing our utmost to facilitate and favor cooperation across with other countries, neighboring Moldova and others in this area.
Thanks very much. No, that was actually wonderful. Maria, what legal frameworks are protecting energy infrastructure during climate change events? Because I've seen what happens when in fact they're not protected.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Well, I'm from Brazil. I'm based in Brazil, and I want to give another perspective for a question, not another. It is included here, of course. Brazil is 90% renewable in this system. It's kind of, we have other, let's say, issues about security and resilience, and we are very exposed to climate change because of that. You depend too much on that. And recently, we had some kind of natural disasters. In the south, we have floods, and we are reconstructing all the infrastructure there to deal with the event. And some lessons have emerged, very related to what Sylvia just mentioned. Things like even renewable systems are kind of dependent on something, dependent on infrastructure, dependent on transmission lines, dependent on stability to the system, because sometimes you don't have sun, you don't have wind, so you need to have other kind of mix to deal with this kind of instability to fix the system. And some of the things that we've seen is that the frameworks, the regulatory frameworks have to follow the idea that they have to increase resilience, and they have to increase sustainable infrastructure in the way that they will resist more to any kind of disasters and events. And the second thing is very related to community, but even more in Brazil, you have to look at the impacts that the accidents or the disaster has on people. And because they are different, depend on the social strat you are. So I like to bring it for a very practical approach. And I have a list of questions that we've made to construct the legal framework. Things like, who are the people most affected by this disaster? What are the color, gender, and age of the victims or survivors of the disaster? What are the existing public policy, if any, and that assure climate security in urban and rural areas equally in the same way, because we have both in Brazil and both in the same region that was impacted? What are the predominant ethnicities, the people, the local people living there? Because we might have it in Australia, we have it a lot in Brazil, in different areas, where the communities that live in the locations and where the disaster occurred, how was the help, the financial? It was distributed equally, considering, let's say, the difference between them. So that's the kind of thing that we use it to do the legal framework to approach that. Because, of course, it is a tragedy. Of course, you have priorities, but people are priority. That's the point. People have to be in the center of discussion. We don't want just to reconstruct things. We need to reconstruct them for people. That's the thing that you have to bear in mind.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much. Now, Doug, I'm going to get you to swap seats with Evgenia because I'm about to ask her a question. And she needs to come up. So, or somebody can shuffle. You okay from here? Oh,
Are you sure?
Okay. So I'm actually very interested in the legal reforms and how they can enhance energy security. And Evgenia is very happy to answer that question.
I don't know.
Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing the fantastic place of the moderator. Actually, it's super interesting because I was thinking about talking totally, like addressing totally different issues, but lots of came up in the process of a discussion. And you brought up the point that this should be by people, for people, and that any kind of reconstruction and recovery efforts should be for people first and foremost. But in Ukraine, we have very specific case. We're not only doing it during the war, we're not doing it for people, but we're doing it by people now. And this is the fantastic showcase of resilience and resistance and people-centered approach, but not only people-driven approach to the reconstruction and recovery efforts. And Ukraine is the case study. It is actually on the forefront of leading on so many things. And the question was about regulatory frameworks. And Ukraine has advanced it a lot. I started teaching environmental law in 2013, and I was advocating for the adoption of climate law in Ukraine since then. Nobody believed back then that climate law exists. in Ukraine. Some professors still question it, and I still have to fight. The climate law does exist. And we obviously could see it by the adoption this year. Ukraine adopted Ukrainian climate law that enshrines, that has the legally binding goal to go net zero by 2050. And when I'm saying it to someone, you know, to the international partners, when I'm showcasing that Ukraine is advancing that all, I'm usually like addressed with the question like, are you a big dreamer? Yes, we are. But it's not only because we dream big, but because we do a lot. And because when you're in the crisis, you can't afford yourself not to respond because you're not appointing one more meeting for the sake of one more meeting to discuss how to address the crisis, because you are acting responsibly when the issue occurs. But again, it's not the point of the legal implications or like the elaboration of the legal frameworks, because again, I studied law, I did law, and I got fully disappointed in law. And when I'm talking like, when I have to confess that I'm a legal scholar, sometimes I feel a huge shame because we were watching how some of the laws are not working, and sometimes they never work, and sometimes they never will work. And here we're coming back to the point that unless it is driven by the people, unless this law are supported by the proper enforcement mechanisms. And I think by the law enforcement, we usually tend to think as legal scholars about the secondary legislation that should be elaborated and then engage like that, then forcing businesses to align with these legal regulations. We saw the fantastic development of the climate litigation, and this was like I was applauding to that. But again, unless it is driven by political will, financial support, but unless it is driven by the people, it won't happen. And Ukraine is a great case study, being on the forefront, on the front lines, actually, on the front lines of everything, of the climate change, of showcasing how our old-fashioned energy system and old-fashioned like the approach to understanding what energy security is and what dependency can lead to. We're showcasing that there is no other possibility to delay the action. And if Ukraine is doing this, and we're doing this, we're rebuilding during the war, and here we have like the solar power panel that was hit by the Russian drone, but it was replaced in a day. So only renewable-based reconstruction, only green transition supported by people on the ground. And I really, in this case, I don't sound like an academic, but I would like us all to think more on how to make law work. Law that sometimes and most often does not. Thank you. I didn't answer your question, but.
Thank you. Would you like the notes back? So I thought I actually might throw to you now, Simon, if that's all right. What policy strategies best support energy security and climate goals?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I have 3 thoughts about it. And if I do well, then they will form a circle. And if not, then it. So you can hear me, right? Okay, good. So first of all, I think every country has to build up. Can you hear me? Yeah, renewable energies as much as possible. I don't think it's taken for granted, but we are on a good way. For example, maybe that one is better. Yeah, thank you very much. So Ukraine introduced the market premium scheme. And did the first auctions, and I think it's a good start, but we have to enable that much stronger, to be faster, to build up renewables. That's the first thought. The second one is, of course, we still will have to import and export energy, and the exporting countries as well as the importing countries should make sure
that they diversify. If you take this example of Austria, they get 80% of their energy through a natural gas pipeline from Russia through Ukraine to Slovakia to Austria. Now they stop it. It was planned to stop it end of the year. Now they stop it now because of a sentence from an international court. So it immediately affects not only Austria, but also other countries like Slovakia and Ukraine. So I think it's a cluster risk here. We should avoid that when we talk about new technologies or other options like biomethane. Or Ukraine and Germany are negotiating about exporting and importing biomethane from Ukraine to Germany. And I think that's a good approach, and both ends are working hard on it and in the right direction. But it would make more sense to me if European Union at all would have a scheme for Ukraine biomethane and not a bilateral agreement that is not good enough. And it could also be opened for other markets like Brazil, that Brazil could also export their biomethane to Europe under the same scheme, so that we diversify this kind of regulation. For hydrogen, green hydrogen, methanol, and ammonia. Brazil is negotiating with Europe and with Germany to export heavy amounts of green hydrogen and ammonia to Europe. It should be not bilateral again. It should be a global market regulation that Namibia, others can also participate. So many are building up on these options. So we diversify the risk here. And the third thought is that we have to discuss to our military, to our army, to the defense forces. I have an example here, and that is the circle 2.1. Sweden want to build more offshore wind, so they developed 13 wind parks in the Baltic Sea region, and the military stopped it a week ago. They said it's against the interest of defense. It's the new frontier towards Russia, and we don't want to have offshore wind farms at all in the Baltic Sea region. I think it's a big mistake, but because they don't understand wind farms and how you can use the wind farm for your defense purposes. And that is because we don't talk to them. So we have to bring them together, make sure that the defense reasons, they are very strong, and I would never argue against them, that they match in the best way with the building up of renewables. The example I have here is from Germany, the German wind industry, the ones who are running the wind farms onshore in Germany, they got contacted by the German military, and they said, actually, your radar systems are very interesting for us. You can detect birds, so the birds get not hit by the wind farm. Then you can also detect drones. So if we can get all your data, and it's not sensible data for a wind farm, I will give my wind farm data to the military for sure. It has not market value for me. I give it, then you can have a very good picture of what is going on in the sky, and you can use it for your defense reasons. And we should work on such kind of cooperations to show that renewables are in many aspects good for the defense of a country.
Nazar, what specific challenges face Ukraine's energy transition?
You ask a global question. Thank you. I will try to answer. So as you may guess from my name, I'm originally from Ukraine, but also I have been working at the Pacific Northwest National Lab of the U.S. Department of Energy for the past 12 years. So I can provide perspective from both countries, bringing experience, knowledge from Ukraine, but also to tell about vision from the United States. I just came from the U.S. pavilion where the State Department announced 3 exciting projects for Ukraine for small modular reactors to replace coal power plants with SMRs, to produce clean fuels, ammonia and hydrogen with small modular reactors, and finally to produce clean steel. So this is just an example when the United States is helping Ukraine to rebuild the energy system. As you know, Ukraine produces more than 50% of electricity with nuclear reactors, and so it will continue in the future. So This one part of our equation is nuclear, that Ukraine will still work on expanding nuclear capacity, right? This being said, it is just one part. Another part is renewables, and you may know that in the past it was a very slow progress with the introduction of solar and wind and all kind of bioenergy, and it is completely changed with the Russian attack, because what happened is when one large coal power plant is damaged, it's very, very difficult to rebuild it, because you just do not have equipment. And what is rightly pointed, here is a panel from the solar plant that was damaged by the Russians, right? This panel was replaced within 1 day. We are working, we help one local community in Kharkiv region, Merefa, to, they had a solar power plant that was damaged by the Russian missile. They came to us with a request to help with a technical economic analysis to not only to rebuild, but to expand this plant. So in addition to solar, they also want now batteries. They want gas generators. They want to create a microgrid with their consumers to be resilient. And so there is a key word that we have here on a title of our panel, right? It is also security. It is security of supply and resilience of local communities. So going forward, I think that one big push will be to build this renewable energy project, distributed energy resources that Ukraine has in abundance, to provide electricity to the people, to be resilient. But also at the same time, we are talking here about climate goals, right? Because with nuclear and with large share of renewables, Ukraine will be able to achieve these climate goals. And we have a really nice poster here that Ukraine will aim to be to reach net zero emissions by 2050. The law that was adopted just a couple of months ago. This is a great example that Ukraine is showing to the world that even during this very difficult times of war, you still can make an incredible progress in rebuilding to the power system, rebuilding energy system in general, to be more secure, more resilient, and also climate oriented. Thank you.
Well, actually, I did have a follow-up question. Isn't that interesting? And it's written here, I think. We're looking at which renewable solutions are actually the most viable in post-conflict context, because you can't be too sophisticated, or can you?
Okay, so you know, about a year ago, we asked the same questions, right? So a year ago, we produced a report for COP28 when we look at the projections for future development in Ukraine, like how to decarbonize Ukrainian power system and energy system in total. So the question is, maybe it is not that simple question, right? Because the situation is changing dramatically year to year. A couple of years ago, solar was not that competitive in Ukraine. Now it is one of the cheapest resources. With a drop in prices for panels, for equipment that is needed, right? Solar now is very, very competitive, so it is changing. So for that, we have some results where the National Energy and Climate Plan that was modeled with my colleagues here from the Institute of Economics and Forecasting, National Academy of Sciences. But even like though we finished those models run less than a year ago, we need to update this, because you know, we have new data, we have new assumptions, we have new cost estimates. So for that reason, Ukraine is developing a low emission development strategy up to 2050, where we'll be providing updating results. And what we want to do is to do this on a permanent platform. So later today at 5 p.m., we will be launching Ukrainian Energy and Climate Modeling Forum to create a platform to exchange data, to exchange assumptions, to exchange the results of our studies, talk to the government, talk to funders, talk to all stakeholders that we have, to bring all this together, you know, to create this knowledge base to inform the reconstruction and then rebuilding of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. So Douglas Horn, we went out for dinner to an Azerbaijani restaurant, a group of us last night, and you can't stand between this man and a lamb chop.
It's true.
Now, apart from being the lover of lamb chops, you're also a technology innovator working across multiple disciplines to build critical tools for infrastructure. We spoke before the panel about things like opportunity and legacy code. And I wondered if you could share your vision for what a reconstruction could look like.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for having me here. I build infrastructure projects at the grassroots level, and they all include needed tools. I'm of the belief that many of the problems we have exist because we don't have the tools to solve them. And those are the types of things that I try to build. Technology is a part, computer technology is a deep part of everything I do. In computer development, we have this idea called legacy code. It's the hardest thing to get over often. What you are inheriting from the existing system, your operating system, whatever that may be. When you get a chance to build some greenfield project where you don't have to deal with legacy code, you can think about the future and not always the past. Now, when I look at Ukraine, and the country has paid a terrible, terrible, terrible price, and yet you're about to have an incredible opportunity to rebuild vast parts of your country without the legacy code if you choose to, right? So when we see this, we see often you can see leapfrogging of other technologies, right? In Africa, where I was working on a payment system, we saw 15 years ago mobile money come in faster than anywhere else in the world. The reason was because the existing financial infrastructure that everywhere else, most other places had, didn't exist. So their loss of a system, you know, their absence of a system drove them to be able to have more growth than they would have had if they'd had an existing legacy code, right? So I think there's an incredible opportunity here, and I wanted to, in thinking about that, I wanted to think about other places that have rebuilt or built society from the ground up recently without that. And some that I can think of, well, last year, COP was in Dubai. And if you look at the skyline of Dubai, you can see that what was not very long ago, you know, barren desert is a ultra modern city. Now, you could ask questions about what were their goals in doing that, right? Maybe it wasn't to have the best possible society. Maybe it was. Similarly, I look at ghost cities in China from the 2010s, where you'd see massive buildings that are built and constructed through central planning, but that stand empty for decades, right? These are results of taking that opportunity of a greenfield development and perhaps squandering it by not having the right mindset. So I encourage Ukraine to look into what is the real goal in developing these new technologies? What are you going to, how are you going to take advantage of this opportunity? One other thing from computer development is always bring in your end user early and often. And I think that's a key to success for rebuilding infrastructure. So I'm very encouraged by the opportunity, and thank you very much.
Normally we throw to questions, and thank you, but we've been asked to pause because we have a very special guest. And I just wanted to say, look at these black and white walls. Think about how we can color them in and what it might look like. I actually want to start coloring them in. Let's get our textures and go for it. Thank you so much for joining us today. I so appreciate it. Thank you.